just pitch alone, they found that CEOs with lower pitched voices led bigger teams. They commanded more on scales of trustworthiness and credibility. They were considered more trustworthy, more credible than counterparts with higher voices. And this was crazy. On average, lower pitched voices, the CEOs made $180,000 more a year in personal income.
Welcome to the podcast about communication in business. I'm your host, George Torok. Did you know that I'm known as the speech coach for executives? Because I help business leaders deliver the intended message for greater success. And we do that through one-on-one coaching or group training for the team. On this podcast, you will hear insights and advice from communication experts from around the world. My guest today is Tina Dietz. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Tina. 1, she has launched not 1, but 2 first-in-category companies. Her teams at Twin Flame Studios and Alembic Press have been quietly disrupting the audiobook and publishing industries for years with joyful rebellion and next level strategy. Way back in 2015, before most people could even spell RSS feed, Tina's first podcast was named by Inc.com as one of the top 35 podcasts for entrepreneurs, and that was after only 25 episodes. And 3, here's one you won't forget. Tina actually owns the URL transformationalkaraoke.com. Clearly a long-term investment. She's known for getting high-level leaders, think CEOs, authors, even stoic boardroom types, people who don't like to look silly, to grab the mic and sing. Yes, sing. It's leadership development and with backup vocals. Oh, and here's a bonus fact. She once got a room full of 200 international thought leaders, including a Nobel Peace Prize nominee, to meow. That's right, meow. On command, repeatedly. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in that room. Tina Dietz, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Hey, George. Thanks so much for having me.
Delighted to be talking with you today. And with all your background and experience, we're going to take a look at how our voice affects our communication, and in particular, how it has an impact on how people trust us, how we build trust. And let's start with, why is our voice perceived as being important to the message?
You know, it's funny because I know how much work you do with communication and perception and all of that. So it's always good to be having a conversation with somebody who already has a deep well of knowledge. So, chime in here as we kind of go down the rabbit hole. I think that our voice is one of those things that we don't pay a lot of attention to most of the time. Particularly, the vocal qualities that in research have been shown to increase trust, credibility, those kinds of features. And we're dealing with this really interesting combination of our self-perception of our voice. And I think you and I both know, and most people don't like the sound of their own voice. We're dealing with our internal conversations while we're speaking. We're dealing with cultural norms and those types of things. We're dealing with also, if you're dealing cross-culturally with different languages, different vocal patterns from different cultures, all of those things in the global world that we live in are important to take into consideration, because our voice is very much a thumbprint, of who we are. And one of the ways that we become most recognizable to people when we're communicating, even if our circle is quite small.
And very true that we hear ourselves differently than other people hear us. Mm-hmm. We're always aghast the first time or even multiple times that we hear ourselves. That's not my voice, that recording. That's not me. That's someone else. That can't be me, because we hear inside our head, not outside. And
Right.
that's when it comes to communication in general, it's not about necessarily what is going on in our head. It's what people are perceiving that they're picking up from us. And now, what are some of the characteristics that we listeners give to voice quality? What do we assign, whether it was intended or not? What do we automatically assume when we hear a particular voice pattern?
Well, the one study that always blows my mind was one done by Duke University a number of years ago now. So I'd love for them to redo it, because this was done in the early 2000s. And it was a study of 792 male CEOs, different size companies, different industries. You have obviously a lot of CEOs, right? And they studied the impact of pitch on a couple of different variables, including, how big was the company that they led? How much money did it make? How much money did they make? How big were their teams? And so on just pitch alone, they found that CEOs with lower pitched voices led bigger teams. They commanded more on scales of trustworthiness and credibility. They were considered more trustworthy, more credible than counterparts with higher voices. And this was crazy. On average, lower pitched voices, the CEOs made $180,000 more a year in personal income on that one factor alone. Now, you can normalize for all kinds of other factors. And I know a lot of people who have higher pitched voices, particularly women, hear a fact like that and start to freak out. But I think what we really should be drawing from that conclusion, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it, George, is really we're listening for certain things. We might be enculturated to listen for certain things. And all of those folks, by the way, were North American. It was cross-border, I believe, but I believe it was all North American companies. So it's something. What do you think about that little fact?
I'm not too surprised, Tina. And when I think about people with great voices, unfortunately, I mostly only think of male, and I think of Morgan Freeman or James Earl Jones. Their voice just has a presence in itself. One, because it's of a full tone, it's and because of the deepness of the voice, which and can be intimidating for women because women's voices are higher, and so. I wonder, is that a cultural lesson that we've assigned that because we, came from male-dominated societies, therefore we assume that a deeper voice must be the leader because that's the way it used to be and that's carried on. So now when a female comes into the lead position, the first thing we notice, of course, is her voice. And she doesn't sound like authority. Now, there are some exceptions. I'm thinking of, again, I have to go back to the movies, and I'm thinking of Marlene Dietrich.
Right. Yeah, but we wouldn't necessarily associate Marlene Dietrich with leadership, right?
No,
or gravitas or
Yeah.
credibility, but we might associate someone like James Earl Jones with that. After all, CNN, this is CNN, right? That was him doing that voice, or, anybody in the audiobook company, my audiobook company, Twin Flame Studios. I've heard regularly, can you get me a voice like Morgan Freeman to narrate my audiobook? And first of all, no, but don't do that. Morgan Freeman has a fantastic voice, but you want your own voice or a voice similar to yours in a nonfiction audiobook situation. We could talk about that more. But your thought about women's voices and authority and where does it come from, there's a bunch of theories on it. That one was that deeper voices carry further. And so before there was amplification, we got used to having leaders who were leading us who could shout across longer distances and be heard longer distances. So that's one theory that's been floated. And, another one certainly has just been having more of a patriarchal culture and just getting used to the voices of authority being what we would consider typically masculine voices or lower, deeper voices. The other thing is that that's been quite interesting is across the 20th century, women's voices and the depiction of women's voices has steadily gotten lower over time. So if you look at movies or listen to movies from, say, the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, you'll hear the heroine is far more up here, and they're speaking a very, like either a very higher voice and, oh, red, that kind of thing. And it's only the femme fatale or the bad girl who has the low voice. Think Mae West, think Marlene Dietrich or Lauren Bacall, right? Those voices, they were much deeper. They were much more sultry. They were down here. They were, and you think about that. So over time, we've seen women's voices go much more from being up in our heads. This is actually a much more natural place for my voice to be, is up here in the top of my throat, but I'm used to talking down here, dropping it further into my throat and my chest, which for one reason or another, that's just the way it's landed. So it's interesting to kind of track these things. And then in the 1970s, we saw the advent of something called vocal fry, which you'll hear in my voice at the end of sentences. It's a little bit of a grating sound, but it's really pronounced in, which is interesting, in male NPR hosts. Think Ira Glass from, in This American Life. He has a ton of vocal fry, but also the Kardashians. And that kind of, at the end of the sentences, you hear them drop down like this. That's vocal fry. And vocal fry, up until very, very recently, in the last 5 years even, has been associated from the 1970s until close to now with a lack of credibility. But it has been postulated that one of the reasons vocal fry showed up was because women were entering the workplace and trying to match lower tones to the voice so that they would be heard and would be taken seriously. So fortunately, as you and I both know, pitch is not the number one or even, certainly not the only credibility factor.
And that's illustrative there of how you changed your voice. You just did it on command, which suggests to me that you've taken some time to practice. You've studied that. Have you studied? Have you taken courses or lessons on voice?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I grew up singing, performing, dancing, acting in musical theater, all of that. And I also, the origin story of my first company, the audiobook company, Twin Flame Studios, was I was voice acting at the time as a paid hobby. And my agent decided it was a good idea for me to check out audiobook narration as a possible specialty. And I didn't end up becoming an audiobook narrator, but what I came away with from the training that I received and the masterwork that I received through my agent and the coaches that I had was that there was a huge gap in the market that wasn't being served, helping authors narrate their own nonfiction audiobooks. So 500 audiobooks later, we've definitely seen that there was something missing there that we've been able to help a lot of folks with.
Do you recommend that authors speak their own book for audiobooks, or should they get someone else with a better voice?
It really depends on the author. So we've over the years distilled down a whole series of questions that we ask. And at the end of the day, what it comes down to is what serves the work best. That's really it. It's not if you go out and ask, if any author goes out and says, should I narrate my own audiobook? Of course. The friends and family can be like, of course you have. It's your story. You have to do it. But at the end of the day, we don't tend to find, unless somebody has a huge following, that narrating their own book makes a huge difference in the sales. What does make a difference is the quality of the narration. That's the most important thing. So if the author is willing, they're going to enjoy it. They're using their voice as part of building their platform. They're willing to take the time for it. And they do have a voice that is going to be fairly pleasant to listen to for a while. And we, of course, help them with that. Then absolutely. That's why 75% of our books are author narrated. That was our big disruption in the marketplace, is that, we developed the process for remotely recording author-narrated audiobooks, and we've continued to refine that process. But if the author isn't going to enjoy it, if it's going to be a slog for them, it's going to come through in their voice. And so that's why we do professionally narrated as well, and hybrid, where you get some of both.
What do you see happening with AI and text-to-voice production?
Boy.
What's that going to do to the whole audiobook thing?
Yeah, I actually wrote a fairly extensive audio article on it last year, and I have a monthly panel of expert series that we just talked about AI in publishing with a fantastic panel a couple of months ago. And it's fascinating how quickly things are changing in the industry, in all across publishing. And specifically with audiobooks, the technology is getting there. It really is getting there for audiobooks. However, the audiobooks by and large still are not selling if they are AI narrated. And there's still a lot of issues with the interfaces for editing AI narrated audiobooks. So anything that has any layer of complexity in it at all gets kind of challenging. And I would like to see us get to a point where we can move through voice to text and AI voices in a way that voice actors still get paid, that nonfiction authors can make use of this in better ways, that we can have more, fully produced, full cast audiobooks in different ways. But there's a lot to work out, both on the ethics side of things as well as the quality and the distribution side of things. Because right now, a lot of the platforms that are offering AI audiobook narration, there's fuzziness on the copyright and the ownership side of things. So it's getting there, but it's got a ways to go yet.
What are some of the qualities that we assign to voice? And what comes to mind right now is whether a person is confident or not. How does confidence show up in voice? And what could people do to sound more confident even when they aren't?
Oh, I'm sure you've seen this so many times with your clients, George, but it's the number one factor that shows credibility. And one of the reasons it shows credibility is because it indicates if somebody is truly comfortable in their skin, and that quality is the tempo at which you speak. And it's not a particular tempo. It's, are you breathing normally when you're speaking? Because if you're breathing too fast, your breath gets shortened, kind of up here. And that indicates like anxiety or worry or like tension. And then if you're speaking really slow, the breath gets kind of, that probably sounds terrible just on audio, what I just did, kind of blowing out the microphone there. It shows that lack of confidence or hesitation. So that is why tempo is the number one quality that is associated with credibility. Because it's associated with the breath and what we are listening for almost on a biological level. It's very cool. Yeah, I'm sure you've got stories about folks in the boardroom or in meetings and things like that. And it just kind of, can make or break a meeting. It really can.
Very much so. Now, you mentioned that you were a singer, and it seems to me that people who have been singers have better voices because of the singing lessons. And I think the most important lesson is that they learned how to breathe.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. You probably heard the difference. And also it's just, if you think about the human skull, it's, basically a 10-pound bowling ball being held up by meat. There's not a lot of bone between the skull and the shoulders. It's just your it's your spine. So there's a ton of musculature in there that we don't exercise, that we don't pay a lot of attention to, that holds a tremendous amount of tension. So I'm even just throat massage and trying to loosen up the throat muscles themselves can improve somebody's vocal quality. That's why so many vocal techniques have to do with the breath, not just for breath control, but because it automatically starts increasing blood flow to the throat area. There's some really cool apps out there, like Vocal Image is actually one that I've used myself. It is a paid app, and I am not a paid spokesperson for them. But there, if you wanted to get into some really serious vocal exercises, that one in particular has some really, really good ones to exercise the throat and to measure before and after using AI the type of impact the exercises are having on your voice, both from a color standpoint and scales of masculinity and femininity in terms of understandability and articulation. So there's some really cool tools out there to help out, even if you don't want to hire a coach like you or I.
And that's a good point to keep in mind. Our head is this bowling ball, this 10-pound bowling ball sitting on our neck, and we don't think much about the muscles around here and how, one, we don't exercise them, so we maybe don't keep them strong, but it's so easy to store tension in here. It's typically where we store tension is our neck and our shoulders typically. How do you suggest someone warm up for an important meeting or for a speech or even for a podcast so that their voice will sound better? What can they do in those few minutes before they go on?
Well, first of all, because it all comes from the breath, the breathing exercises or a 3-minute relaxation exercise is going to just to pause, to pay attention to the breath, to take a few deep breaths, changes things tremendously in the quality of the voice. The other piece is going to be maybe some brief jaw and facial massage is nice, some quick throat massage just to kind of pay attention and maybe loosen up some tension there. Another one would be to just do some stretching of the face and the jaw, opening and stretching. Yawning is a great way to loosen up the face. Just forced yawns, 5 or 6 forced yawns is a wonderful way to loosen up the facial muscles. And then in terms of articulation and whatnot, you can't go wrong with good old-fashioned tongue twisters, little rubber baby buggy bumpers, a little black bug's blood, a little red leather, yellow leather, those kinds of things. So those things can help with the articulation and getting the face warmed up. Those would be my first quick ones. There's about 150 more that you can do.
Which we don't have time for today.
No.
Another characteristic I've noticed with some people is they tend to have a scratchy voice. Mm-hmm. It's actually painful to listen to them because their voice grates. What could they do to make it sound nicer?
Now, that's kind of getting down into the source of the issue. It's because a grating voice can be, and that the quality that is the pleasantness of a voice to listen to is called sonority. And sonority usually increases once a voice has a chance to be exercised and to actually be trained. So singing is certainly one way to do it, even if it's not on key. It doesn't really matter. And that's why I like karaoke. It doesn't matter. It's just more about owning your confidence. So, any type of singing that you can do, again, exercises of different kinds, breathing exercises, a lot of it has to do with tension. And sometimes it has to do with things like sensitivities to different environmental factors, allergies, undiagnosed things that might be affecting medically. So if somebody has a really scratchy throat and it hasn't always been that way, that's the other piece to look at, then sometimes there's a medical component that might be affecting it as well. So it's good to go to an ear, nose, and throat specialist to have something like that checked out, or somebody who's a speech therapist. Sometimes they can also figure things out as well.
What about pace? I've noticed in particular, younger people talk rapidly. have you seen that? And why do they do that? Are they come across as unsure of themselves? They're trying to spill out as many words as they can, as fast as they can, and they come across just not confident.
Yeah, that's entwined again with that issue of tempo and why they feel nervous. So they breathe faster, they speak faster, they're afraid they're going to get interrupted, they're afraid they're going to lose their train of thought. And then we also do have to look at cultural factors. Like right now, I'm living in Granada, Spain, and the speed at which Spaniards speak is very fast. And I'm from New York. So, so listening to folks even speak English who are Spanish, they tend to have very, very rapid fire speech. You would see this in Russian as well. And sometimes these languages get perceived as either angry or insecure, two ends of the spectrum, because very fast speech can make us feel that way. But that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is we have to take cultural context into account.
Which means that, or suggests that, doesn't matter how we speak, someone isn't going to like it.
That's probably true. That's where our own identity comes into play, being solid in who we are. And I think, also, I think curiosity plays a big part in what makes us successful in communication. Don't you think? Very much so. Yes. Being curious, I believe, is a much more positive approach than being judgmental. Which is easy to do, because being judgmental, we don't have to think after that. We made our decision, whereas curious means we don't know, and we don't like admitting that. Yeah, I think curiosity is a superpower, and it makes things, it de-escalates things, it makes the conversation more rich, and you don't have to be on your guard when you're curious. You can just be curious and not worry about being defensive. And one of my favorite curious people was Albert Einstein. Mm-hmm. He was a man who was curious about the universe, and he just asked questions to which no one knew the answers, but he asked questions that were worth asking, and we remember him as a genius just because he was curious about big issues, but big the issues, universe, yeah, for sure. Yeah. And imagine if we could be more curious about people. And so maybe now that raises a point when we mishear, when we hear someone and we possibly misinterpret it, how can we respond to that person to clarify our quick judgment? There are two phrases that I love that I use all the time in conversation with my team, as I'm, with clients, with colleagues, with my kids, doesn't really matter. One of them is just the word let's. Let's talk about that a bit more. Ooh, let's explore that. Or, let's pause for a minute, right? So using the word let's, it creates inclusivity, it creates a sense of shared purpose, and it diminishes divisiveness. So that's the other one is tell me more. Just tell me more. Tell me more about what you're thinking. Tell me more about what you just said. Tell me, and just inviting that open-endedness to it often can alleviate misunderstanding. And also the phrase, I'm curious, is nice to use. I'm curious. Did you mean this or this? I'm curious. I'd like to know, I'd like to hear more about what you're saying. And so it clarifies your position as well as invites deeper dialogue. Without creating a sense of someone needing to defend themselves. So those are three of my favorites.
Yeah, and those are valuable. And I suggest that folks, if you weren't writing that down, that you play this back and get those 3 tips from Tina right there, because that could save a lot of angry moments, a lot of embarrassing results. Tina, for people who'd like to know more about you, if people want to see you in action, they can check out your work at twinflamestudios.com and alembicpress.com. And that's spelt ALEMBIC press.com. The first one for the audiobooks, and the second one, is that for printed books, or is that the audiobooks as well?
No, Alembic Press is the first company in the world to transform podcast content into published books. That's our specialty, yeah.
Wow, okay, that's worth looking into. And the best place to start if you want to learn more about Tina and her services is at her monthly live expert panels for nonfiction authors and publishing pros. They're free, high value, and you can binge the replays. Better than binging on Netflix, anytime at twinflamestudios.com/panels. Tina, as we prepare to wrap up, if you could offer advice to a new team leader who's about to go into an important meeting with their team, perhaps it's one of the first meetings, they need to explain the strategy for the year, they're a new leader of the team is judging them. If there's 1, 2, or 3 tips that you would offer on how they can sound better, what would that be?
Well, from my own experience leading teams, and also from my days in business coaching and working with more than 30 industries in 8 countries, I will say that when you are coming in to lead, one of the biggest mistakes people make is feeling like you have to have it all figured out. And so going in with the spirit of curiosity in combination with being clear on a couple of things that you'd really like to, work on together, or are goals that you have in mind. And at the same time, being curious and open to seeing where the team is at, because as a new team lead, you've got to deal with the culture you're inheriting. So getting clear on the culture you're inheriting is going to be really important. And that's where curiosity and questions are going to be incredibly important, possibly before imposing your own, this is the way it should be, this is the way it's going to be, onto a team. So those would be some places that I would start with curiosity, and with finding out kind of what's been working, what would you like to see more of, what's been challenging, what would you like to see less of, more of a curious and comprehensive, almost a SWOT analysis, but of your own team, before you actually get into what's going to be next, because you can't change something unless you know what it is.
And Tina, I wish you had given that advice to some team leaders I saw many years ago who just totally failed. My guest today is Tina Dietz, reminding you that, hey, let's just be more curious. If you like what you heard, tell your friends. And post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.